All right, so are you ready to unpack a case that is both fascinating and kind of sad? We're doing a deep dive on the death of Kenneka Jenkins, and it's a story that is just full of twists and turns, right?
Yeah, this one really captured the public's attention. The mystery of how she died and all the social media posts that went viral, and I mean, just so many questions that still linger.
Exactly. So Kenneka Jenkins was 19 years old from Chicago, and she was found dead in a hotel freezer back in 2017. And it was just a total tragedy, right? Like everyone was just trying to figure out what happened. Was it some horrible accident or was it something more? I mean, was it something sinister?
Hmm.
We're going to lay it all out. We're going to try and separate fact from fiction. We're using a bunch of sources like Wikipedia, news articles. We even found this really in-depth YouTube analysis, so we're giving you the full picture here.
Yeah, it's really important to look at this case from all the different angles,
Yeah.
especially with how much social media played a role in how the story was told, right? Like those early stories that were spreading online, they missed a lot of details, and they only gave part of the story a lot of the time.
Right, and that's why we're here.
Yeah.
Try and sort through it all.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. So it all starts with a night out. Kenneka told her mom she was going bowling and then to the movies with her friends. Sounds pretty normal, right?
Yeah.
But instead, she ends up at a party at the Crowne Plaza Hotel.
And yeah, that's where things start to get a little less clear. That difference between what she told her mom she was doing and where she ended up, I mean, that just immediately made people wonder what was going on.
Oh, for sure. And so this party, it wasn't exactly a quiet get-together. It was a loud party.
Yeah.
And our sources say there was alcohol there and maybe even marijuana. So
Yeah.
that whole atmosphere, it definitely it plays a role in what happens next.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It sets the scene. To really understand Kanika's actions and how everyone around her was acting, we got to understand the environment she was in.
Exactly. So remember all those conspiracy theories about what was reflected in those mirrored sunglasses in that Facebook Live video? Well, when you look at the timeline, those events supposedly happened before other Snapchat and Facebook Live videos that show Kenneka totally alive and well at the party.
Yeah, that is a classic example of how misinformation can just spread so fast online. People get a hold of some theory and then they often just ignore anything that goes against it.
That's so true. That's why carefully breaking down the timeline like the one we found on YouTube, that's why it's so important. So at some point during the party, Kenneka realizes she left her phone, her keys, and her purse back in the party room. And this is where things start to get confusing, right? This is where the stories from her friends, they don't all line up.
Yeah, right here, that's where all the speculation starts to creep in. Those inconsistencies in their stories, they create this void. And then conspiracy theories rush in to fill it up.
And that void, I mean, it just got bigger because of how the hotel and the police responded, which was not helpful at all. So Kenneka's mom, Teresa Martin, gets to the hotel. And, I mean, she's frantic. She wants to see the security footage. But the hotel staff, they insist that she has to file a missing person report first.
Yeah, this is something that happens all the time in missing person cases. Families, they feel like so much time is wasted while the police are following procedure instead of immediately chasing every lead.
Yeah. In this case, I mean, it was no exception. Teresa, she even called 911, but the dispatcher she spoke to suggested that Kenneka was probably just sleeping it off somewhere. She told her to go home and relax. Can you imagine how frustrated and scared she must have been feeling right then?
Oh, it's heartbreaking. This case really shows how much we need empathy and responsiveness from people in authority, especially when they're dealing with families who are going through something like this.
100%. So it wasn't until hours later that the police finally show up and start looking at the security footage. And eventually, yeah, they did find footage of Kenneka wandering around the hotel by herself, clearly disoriented. And this is where that YouTube analysis we were talking about comes in handy because it goes through Kenneka's movements,
Yeah.
like step by step.
Yeah, it helps to visualize her journey through the hotel. It helps us to understand like what state of mind she was in, and maybe it even explains why she did some of the things she did, which, at first they seemed kind of strange.
Right, exactly. So she goes down to the lower level of the hotel, and she wanders down this hallway. She even spends a little time in the men's bathroom. She's obviously not thinking straight at this point. And then the last footage, it shows her heading towards the freezer area. I mean, it's just chilling to watch knowing what we know now.
Yeah, that part of the footage it's powerful. It's like watching this tragedy happen in slow motion, even though, no one at the time knew what was about to happen.
The actual moment she goes into the freezer, that wasn't caught on camera. But the discovery of her body, well, that's where the details get really unsettling.
Yeah, and this is the part of the case that is just really hard to make sense of if you're thinking it was a simple accident. The details of how Kenneka was found, they raise way more questions than they answer.
Kenneka was found face down on her side. One of her shoes was off, and her hair was a mess.
Mm.
The freezer itself was described as being dirty, and her clothes were covered in grime.
It's those details. Those are the things that make people suspicious that something more might have happened. They just don't really fit with the idea of someone accidentally walked into a freezer alone, you know? It's important to remember, though, that some of those details, like the missing shoe and how messed up her clothes were, that can actually be explained by what happens to your body when you have hypothermia.
Okay, so let's talk about the autopsy. What did it show? I know there was some confusion at first, but the official cause of death was hypothermia, right?
Right. The toxicology report showed that Kenneka's blood alcohol level was 0.112. That's way above the legal limit for driving, and we know that alcohol makes you more likely to get hypothermia.
The report also found topiramate. That's a medication for seizures and migraines.
Yeah, that really got people's attention. Kenneka's family was adamant that she wasn't prescribed that medication and wouldn't have taken it on purpose, so that led to a lot of speculation that maybe she was drugged.
Yeah, it added another layer to the whole mystery. But that YouTube video we were talking about, they did a deep dive into the effects of topiramate, and the amount that they found in her system, well, it pointed to her taking it over time, not just a single dose. It's possible she was taking it for some other reason, like maybe for weight loss or to help with her mood, and her family just didn't know about it.
That's a really good point. It's definitely possible she was taking this medication without her family knowing. Sometimes young adults experiment with medications, especially ones that are easy to get online.
So let's talk about some of the conspiracy theories, like head on. The biggest one is that Kenneka's friends were somehow involved in her death.
That theory got so much attention because of those inconsistencies in their stories early on, and also because people thought they weren't acting upset enough in the security footage. But we have to remember that people react to trauma in different ways. Their behavior, even if it seems kind of off, doesn't automatically mean they committed a crime.
And remember that detailed timeline from the YouTube video. Well, it uses that security footage to show that Kenneka's friends actually were searching for her in the hotel. They're seen on camera looking around in different areas, including that hallway near the freezer.
The footage shows them looking for her pretty clearly, which, it goes against the idea that they were trying to cover up something they did.
Then there's that theory about the hotel trying to cover something up. Some people think that the hotel staff purposely waited to start the investigation to protect themselves. Maybe because something illegal was happening at that party.
Yeah, that theory makes sense because the hotel didn't want to share the security footage at first, and they were pretty dismissive of Kenneka's mom. Given all that, it makes sense why people would be suspicious.
And it doesn't help that the family's $50 million lawsuit against the hotel was settled for an unknown amount back in 2023.
True, but settlements don't always mean guilt. They're often a way to avoid a long and expensive trial, and the terms of this settlement, they're still secret.
Another theory that's been going around online says that the security footage was edited to hide evidence. People point to moments where it seems like Kenneka is talking to someone just out of the camera's view.
Yeah, it's definitely possible to edit footage digitally, but there's no proof that happened here. Those times when it seems like she's interacting with someone off camera, that could just be because of the camera angles or because the camera was only recording when it detected motion.
And then you have that organ harvesting theory, which is pretty far out there. Some people even tried to connect it to Selena Gomez because she had a kidney transplant in Chicago around the same time.
That theory is just pure speculation. There's absolutely no evidence to support any connection between Kenneka's death and organ trafficking.
Okay, so if we set aside all those conspiracy theories, what does the evidence tell us? The accidental death explanation depends on the idea that Kenneka, because she was intoxicated and confused, that she just wandered into the freezer and couldn't get out.
That explanation, it's a tragedy, but it fits with what the medical examiner found and the evidence that we have.
But how do we explain things like her missing shoe or the fact that some of her clothes were off?
Well, paradoxical undressing, it happens a lot in hypothermia cases. When your body temperature drops really low, blood rushes to your hands and feet, and that makes you feel like you're overheating. So people will start taking off their clothes, even if it's freezing.
So she might have actually felt hot even though she was freezing to death.
Exactly. The messy hair, the missing shoe, those could be from her stumbling around in the dark, confused and trying to get out.
And there's also that question of why Kenneka didn't use the button on the inside of the freezer door to open it. The YouTube video we were talking about, well, it says that depending on how intoxicated she was and whether or not she knew how that type of freezer worked, she might not have been able to find the button or figure out how to use it in the dark.
And we got to remember that when you're panicking and disoriented, it affects how well you can think. Even if she knew the button was there, she might not have been thinking clearly enough to use it.
And then there's just the fact that hypothermia can set in really quickly, especially with what Kenneka was wearing and how cold it was inside that freezer.
And the alcohol in her system would have made that happen even faster, which means she wouldn't have lived very long even if they had found her sooner.
So we're back to that main question. Was Kenneka Jenkins' death a tragic accident, or was it something more sinister?
While there are some unanswered questions, the evidence really seems to point to it being an accident. But this case really shows how important it is to do thorough investigations, to act responsibly, and to think critically, especially now with social media, where speculation can easily drown out the facts.
Something that really stuck with me as we were getting ready for this deep dive was how much of the focus was on Kenneka's death and all the controversy around it, and how there wasn't much about Kenneka's life. I mean, she was a daughter, she was a sister, she was a friend, she had dreams and goals. It's important that we remember the person behind the headlines.
That's such an important point. It's a good reminder to approach these cases with empathy and respect for the victim and their family. The search for the truth shouldn't overshadow the human side of the story.
Well said. So what's the biggest takeaway for our listeners? What do we hope you walk away with after this deep dive into the death of Kenneka Jenkins?
This case shows how fast misinformation can spread and how quickly speculation can turn into harmful accusations. It's a reminder that critical thinking is more crucial than ever in our digital world. We need to be responsible when we share information, look out for each other, and be careful about the choices we make, especially when we're hanging out with friends.
This deep dive has given us a lot to ponder. What stands out to you? What are your thoughts on what happened to Kenneka Jenkins?
It's a case that stays with you. It raises questions about how we handle tragedies, how we process information, and how we seek truth when it's easy to get lost in the noise.
This deep dive has been insightful and thought-provoking. We hope it's encouraged you to think critically about the information you come across and approach complex situations like this with empathy and an open mind.
And remember, we always love hearing from you. Share your thoughts on our social media platforms. Let's keep the conversation going.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another compelling case and another opportunity to delve into the complexities of the human experience.